Welcome to Pixel Chasing, the podcast where we talk to fascinating people about the most exciting and disruptive trends affecting our world today. With a focus on innovation, science and technology, we engage with the trailblazers and influencers who are taking an active role in shaping our future and signposting the current winds of change. So whether you're walking the dog, looking for some background content for your workout, or are simply looking to learn from experts in their fields, there'll be something for you on Pixel Chasing. Welcome to Pixel Chasing. I am Michael Marciana, and today I have the distinct honour and privilege of welcoming to the podcast the one and only Dror Poleg. I am a huge fan of Dror's, and as you'll no doubt hear in the episode, he is someone who has immense clout, so much that it is impossible not to be drawn into his thinkings about the world as it is and how it will be in the future. For those who don't know who Dror is, first of all, shame on you. But secondly, he is an economic historian researching technology's impact on the way people work and live. He regularly briefs and advises companies such as UBS, Bank of America, HSBC, Recruit Holdings, BCG, AvalonBay, CBRE, Hines, British Land, Liberty Mutual, Dubai Holdings, Cushman Wakefield, and many, many more. He's the author of Rethinking Real Estate, an award-winning book that predicted the current reshuffle of offices, homes and cities. His insights have been featured in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, NBC, Bloomberg, and beyond. Previously, he has worked as a real estate private equity executive, startup founder, front-end developer, parliamentary advisor, and a soldier. He's based in New York and following long stints in Beijing, London, Paris, Melbourne, and Netanya. Today's episode was cut short, as by the end my daughter felt the need to interrupt. So depending on how we edit this episode, you may find it ends somewhat abruptly. I really hope you enjoy listening to Dror as much as I enjoy talking to him. He's fascinating and fantastic. So without further ado, happy listening. Good afternoon.
Hi, Michael.
Is it morning? Is it morning for you?
It is lunchtime.
Afternoon. Good morning. Happy lunchtime. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. I'm big fan. Been following your work for a very, very long time. So it's a real pleasure to be able to sit with you. Arguably one of Israel's greatest exports after the cherry tomato, drip irrigation, and Gal Gadot. I think you're number 4 in terms of influence. So it's a pleasure.
You forgot Yuval Noah Harari, Daniel Kahneman. There's some more serious experts.
They're divisive. You bring people together, so there's a difference there. Not everyone agrees with their sentiments. So, but maybe they'll be 5th and 6th down the line. So, thank you for your time. And I was hoping today to talk about a few things, but not necessarily in a particular order. I'd rather look at you and your career and how that has sort of meandered, intertwined, and linked to appears to be every exciting craze that's been going on, and how you became a voice of, I would argue, an authoritative voice on a number of areas. Most recently, real estate, crypto, there's blockchain, and now AI. And as a starting point, I was just curious to know. Obviously, you've got a very large following now across various social platforms and various courses that you run. If we go back in time, how did you begin your career? I mean, where was your starting point when you started out? I've read your blogs and in post-military. What was the plan? Was it to become an influencer? It wasn't a thing then. So what did you think you were going to be doing?
Heaven forbid. I don't think I am an influencer, and I never wanted to become one. I think if I had to choose one word, it's really like a writer. Everything I've done in life somehow always started from writing about it, and usually from writing about it online. So my career began when I was in high school or even middle school. I was promoting nightlife events. So kind of like, not even nightlife, we can call it afternoon life events. So, parties for kids my age.
Writing posters and things.
Yeah, giving out flyers, basically being a promoter. And sometimes being involved in the production as well. So, I was, let's say, 14. My brother had a friend who was like 17 and who was a DJ and had some equipment. So me and a few friends would kind of come together, pick a venue that also somebody knew somebody, and, charge charge like, I don't know, 5 shekels or 10 shekels entrance on some Friday afternoon, before dinner, but after school, and kind of split the proceeds. Uh, Sounds a little crazy, but Israel is open like that you can kind of do business as a kid. And very quickly, I kind of got on the internet in the mid 90s, and almost as soon as I got there, I started writing. So like by building websites and writing. There were no blogs
Yeah,
per
but to
se back
who? This
then.
is like the audience was so limited. Were you writing for yourself? Was it cathartic? Did you see that it would go somewhere?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One, I participated in all sorts of bulletin boards, as they were called at the time, kind of in online communities, particularly about music and kind of culture. So we would write to each other, whoever was in the group. I don't know, we had like 100 people. So something later, maybe it was 500. So we would write to each other and comment and kind of like participate in a community. And second, I would post stuff on my website. Yeah, to who? I'm not sure. When you're a writer, it's kind of like you have some mental issues generally, that you think that you have something to say and that people would be interested in them. So you just assume that it would be interest to someone. But I mean, content, the whole essence of the internet is the fact that now everyone can share something. So you kind of felt compelled. Hey, I'm here. I see other people are writing stuff, so I should write something as well. So I started writing. And then everything I've done in life kind of grew out of that. So I wrote about music and nightlife, and I worked in that through high school. Later, I was in China and I was writing about Chinese, the tech scene, the media scene, and I got involved in that, in like real estate development in China and some online advertising in China. Then I wrote more about whatever interested me at the time, which was more like the intersection of tech and real estate, drew me further into that. And then I generally write about whatever I think is interesting. So crypto, AI, geopolitics, whatever kind of pops up and seems relevant. And also what people actually ask me about. People email me back, a lot of my readers, and say, oh, what about this? What about that? So I'm like, okay, it looks like there's something here that needs some more explaining. But the common thread, I would say, of everything I do is some sort of deep anxiety about the future, maybe, of like, me as a human being, how do I make a living? How do I remain relevant? And that's what always guides me. And it guides me towards like looking at all these emerging technologies and finance and other things, which seems to interest other people, even though I frustrate my readers sometimes because it's hard to explain what I actually write about because it keeps changing.
It's funny you say that, and this might be a reference that's completely lost on you and probably on a lot of the listeners. When I read your work, did you ever read the late Chief Rabbi of England's work? He wrote a lot.
Of course,
and
Jonathan Sachs.
He wrote a lot on the weekly Dvar Torah. He wrote amazing. I think it was Covenant Conversation. And what he did amazingly was, for
I
someone
read
who's a
all of it
theologian,
every week of the year. I've read.
maybe that's
Jonathan
what you're
Sachs.
influenced by, because his ability to weave deep theological concepts with secular thinkers, with modern populist individuals, and create a deep relevancy and poignancy from things that often felt abstract and unconnected. And when I read your work, it's something very similar. You'll write with the fluency, which is is mind-boggling, given your mother tongue is most likely not English, and your ability to bring disparate strands into a really cohesive narrative. And I don't know whether you think that way or it's deliberate, but part of what makes it so engaging and convincing, that it doesn't feel like it's just Dror's thoughts, which are obviously highly valuable, but they're almost always brought in from a left field concept that you sort of tie together quite nicely. Is that deliberate?
So one, I mean, Rabbi Sachs, I think I really read most of his stuff relatively late in my career, I would say. But I do think we're both drawing from the same places. I mean, I think while we're on the topic, I think it's a very Jewish way of approaching topic. I mean, Jewish literature and Jewish law it's all like random discussions of, starting from how to clean your bathroom, and through that, figuring out some principle that applies to how to wage war, and then to economic issues. Like, it's always like a conversation that kind of is very eclectic and mixed up. And that also assumes that there are certain kind of deep principles that you can see in one place and that apply to another place, and that everything is kind of fair game in terms of like philosophizing about it and making it relevant somehow. So yeah, I would say it is very Jewish. I think my thinking and my approach is very Jewish. I had never defined it like that, but it is. In terms of whether it's intentional, not as I think generally my work is quite I think I could benefit, let's say, financially from being much more deliberate and much more kind of structured about what I write about, when I write about it. I tend to be the opposite of that. I'm very intuitive in terms of, I write about what interests me. It's very hard for me to be disciplined. Even though I work a lot and I write a lot, if there's something that I have to write, it's going to be very hard for me to write it. And it's a constant discussion internally for me, whether that means I'm lazy or I'm not serious, or whether that's actually my way of being serious, or I should just follow what I feel. And, it's an ongoing discussion. So I think the short answer is that's just how I think. So that's how I write. I kind of see stuff and I'm like, oh, this connects to some other thing, and this is fun to mix them together. So yeah.
Well, surely, I mean, I can relate to that. I'm a very what I tend to do is to leave the most important things in my life to do to the very last minute. Like, and the things that are the most irrelevant but enjoyable always take priority. So I can relate to that. But arguably, what you just described in a world, and you've touched on this in some of your writings, where AI can consume, the world's content, being as much as you can an individual thing, who thinks in an unconventional way, that becomes your superpower, because otherwise anyone can write anything based on what's out there. And so I wonder, those who don't think in that vein, and those who work towards writing specifically in a two-dimensional way or very factual, they become obsolete. People like you, and talk about anxiety for the future, I can share your anxiety around where we're going as society and what we're going to do in it. But surely you're better placed than most, given the way you approach your thinking, the way you communicate your thoughts, and the topics you choose to engage in, and couple that with a tech revolution that allows you, and I don't know if it is just you in the Dror Poleg world of information sharing, but if it is just you, somebody to have an impact with relatively low overheads, doesn't that make you the superstar of the future? And now,
So I think I've been quite impressed with what AI can already do. So I'm not sure it cannot replace people that are writing creatively.
so
Or
are
let's
you?
put
So
it.
are you real, by the way? And are you
No,
AI right now?
I am real, but let's put it differently. I'm pretty sure that AI will be able to produce very creative and compelling syntheses of different things in a fun way. Uh, as for people and the effect on them, it's not clear. I mean, even if it cannot produce what I write, it can overwhelm my audience to the point where it's very hard to even find what I write. But that has always been true on the internet, because there's so much stuff out there, and still people manage to find stuff that resonates with them. And I think that's where future hope also comes from. We already know from our experience online that what people are looking for, the more abundance there is of information, the more people tend to be segmented into smaller and smaller segments, and the more these segments suddenly become financially viable. So one of the things that amaze me, and that amaze me every day, is how I can make a living with still a relatively small audience, and how I even made a living with an even smaller audience, and be relevant to a certain group of people in a way that both, I think, creates value for my audience, I hope, and I'm told, and also that allows me to keep doing it. And we spoke before about my strange style and the eclecticism of it. And I think it comes down to that I think people are not necessarily looking for the best or the latest, or they're looking for a very specific voice. And the more content there is, the more there is room for specific voices to draw an audience and become viable in some way. So personally, I think humans will be making money from creating content in 10 years as well, and in 20 and in 50. I also think this is a broader trend with technology, is that when we look at how it impacts content specifically, we miss out how it impacts the rest of the economy. And usually the net effect is that it improves productivity in other parts of the economy so much that it creates much more time for leisure for people. And then they end up consuming even more content, and content kind of gets integrated into more things, which creates demand for all sorts of new creation. So if you look back 100, 120 years, you see it very clearly, how, let's say, I don't know, records or TV or films decimated a lot of the creative arts in one way. But on the other hand, they created so much more demand for content that I think arguably today, there's still a lot of people that work, even more people that work in those industries than 120 years ago, even though technology now allows like one person to serve 200 billion listeners at one time. And still, I think we have as many singers today as we had before radio and records came up. And so, yeah.
It just feels, and I read a lot of your thoughts around the long tail and how more people will have access to more tools to create a larger audience themselves. Historically, people were limited and restricted to often their geographical locations, and music is a good example for this. But surely we just get saturated to a point where there's equality of opportunity, but there's just not equality of outcome. And fundamentally, it's so few people and who will be able to benefit in the ways that you're referencing and alluding to, that the delta of the haves and the have-nots, the influencers and the consumers, and the ability to derive new forms of creativity through consumption, that's outstripped by the decimation of things AI brings. Like surely the pace, that they're not aligned, they're incongruent, and the net result isn't positive.
Yes, I don't know if we can say that most people will not benefit, because probably most people will benefit, but the distribution of income will be very different than it was, let's say the 1950s, if we take that as a benchmark. So I think we will not have a middle class. We will not have that kind of bell-shaped world. That was a kind of a feature or an artifact of the industrial world, and it was a feature for a very short time in history. And we keep referring back to it as if that's normal and now is weird, but actually most of history was kind of defined by the same kind of extreme inequality. That said, I think even in the 20th century, with that world of the middle class, there was that industrial tendency to create a few like very large organizations that are very powerful. And part of how we dealt with that, I think, in two ways. One, from a policy perspective, more public services, more taxes on those corporations and kind of redistribution. But also from more of, we can call it like a market perspective, we allowed individual people to invest in those giant companies and to benefit from their growth and their stability. So, to have those bonds for retirement and those stocks that went up in value. And I think part of what we need to do going forward is to enable people to benefit from all of that technological growth, which is no longer just... I think just buying shares of public companies is no longer enough. We have to find ways to enable the general public to benefit from kind of earlier stage investment, or even investment in individuals and in kind of smaller businesses. So if 100 people write a newsletter and one of them makes $10 million a year, so that the 99 others that are writing and maybe everybody else in society could kind of get a little piece or invest in that person that is doing something remarkable. So I think we'll see some experimentation with more investment models to kind of moderate.
Would you consider tokenizing yourself? Have you considered tokenizing?
I would, but I think it's less. The thing with tokens specifically is that it seems like more of a gimmick at the moment. I think it shows us some models that I think are becoming more and more relevant, and we'll have to figure out how to implement them. But I'm not sure if that's the correct implementation and the correct technology, or even the correct moment in time. It might take 20 years until there's like mainstream demand for that type of thing. But I almost have no doubt that it will arrive, that people, on the one hand, individuals will be able to build huge businesses almost on their own, which means that you need the public to be able to invest in these type of individuals. And also you need a safety net to enable more individuals to take those bets and to try to build all sorts of things. Both because it's good, but also because I think people will have less and less choice. So we have to provide some sort of safety net, because people make bets. Ultimately, those bets, if they pan out, they benefit society at large.
But like, it's not realistic. I mean, you look at like OpenAI, I think is a great example to the point you're referencing, is that I think there's around 375 employees, and it's a multi-billion dollar, and it will become one that's valuable. Google has what, 135,000. You can just see now how two comparative game-changing industries, the size, the number of people it took to get it to $1 trillion is so significantly smaller. Surely fewer people get access to these sort of things, and particularly when it's driven by such high tech. Is it idealistic to think there's going to be equality of access to the opportunities to these investments? Surely it's going to be those in the know, those with the connections, those with the skills. And you can see it all now online on Twitter, all these guys and girls selling, pay me $25 and I'll show you how to do a Mid-Journey proms, and I'll show you how to do chat. You can see now there's few people making big money. Like, did you see a scenario realistically where you can see that equality being shared, given it's such a short time frame from 5 years ago where we were all thinking our jobs were for life and we can invest in our pensions, which were index linked or linked to real estate offices.
So do I think it's realistic? Whether it's possible, yes, I think it's possible. Whether it's going to happen, I think we'll get something in between. It will not benefit as much as we could, but we'll probably benefit more than we think. I don't think that everyone will go hungry and the world will cease to exist. The main issue now, I think, with our policy and approach to these things is that it doesn't seem to be very productive. One, our governments are just not very good anymore at spending the money that they have. So I'm not against taxes and even higher taxes, but it seems like a lot of the issues, definitely in the US, but I know that in the UK and elsewhere as well, is that we're not getting enough bang for our buck in terms of our investment in infrastructure, in healthcare, in education. There is a lot of spending, but the outcomes are just not very good because of various reasons. Second is that because of our fears of, everything you just described, which I share, we tend to try to kind of handicap our innovation and our technology companies, and also to kind of not celebrate people who try to do crazy things and sometimes succeed and really benefit all of us, which I think is just very unhealthy for society. I think we have to find a way to kind of actually push in both directions, both to encourage more innovation, to celebrate people when they do great things, and also to like not make too much fun of them or vilify them when they fail, but at the same time to figure out how to take even more of the profits from that and redistribute it and reinvest it in a way that benefits society as a whole. So we have to do both. One analogy that I like on this front is the Norwegian model of how to deal with oil profits. I think we should treat innovation as kind of a natural resource that suddenly boomed. And like, obviously we've been innovating for a long time, particularly here in America, but it's very clear that over the last 10 years and probably for the next 10, 20 years, there's going to be like this explosion of new ideas that create a lot of new wealth that comes out of nowhere. And because it happens so quickly and it's so concentrated in a few firms and a few locations, it can have a very negative impact on the rest of society. And I think that the right policy is to, one, harvest a lot of those profits, but reinvest them partly outside of government or through some independent agencies. So not like private ones, but kind of like again, like the Norwegian oil fund has its own board. There's legislation that kind of specifies what it's allowed to do and not allowed to do, which means it's sheltered from short-term political concerns. So whoever's in government cannot just come and take the money and do whatever they want with it. It has like a specific mandate. And that it invests both in terms of just investing that money financially for the benefit of the public, so to make sure that it actually makes money and everyone has enough for retirement. And it also invests in initiatives that ensure that more people are going to continue to have opportunity to do cool things in the future. So in education, in healthcare, in general facilities that make life better and make it easier for, for children to learn and for people to live a healthy life. I think this way of thinking seems to be like something that more governments should explore.
It feels positive, and think reading between the lines, it feels like to handle the challenges that are coming out thick and fast, we need strong social contracts and social cohesion. But it feels like the world's never been more divided. Politics feels very adversarial, and often economic policies are used to batter the other side with. So it would be nice if we were more collaborative with how we went about defining our politics. But looking around the world right now, and we'll see in the US elections next year, it's going to be a very, very divisive race. And you see it in Israel, you see it in Hungary, you see it in mainland Europe, you see it here. The center ground seems to have sort of disappeared, and it feels like you need a strong center to balance the rapid change we're getting. And without that sort of unified approach to facing these problems, we're going to struggle. And around that, I wonder, overall then, and we'll move away from AI shortly, if you had a line around,
Mm-hmm.
super excited to terrified, both as a father and as an entrepreneur, we heard recently, I don't know what the actual survey was, but half of all AI experts, have a 10% fear that AI will end humanity. Do you sit on that fence? Are you sort of burying your head in the sand as to are you looking to maximize opportunity for yourself? When you look at your kids, do you go, I'm excited for you because the future is going to be something great? Or do you sit and go, I'm going to do good on my newsletters and use AI tools to get more reach, but fundamentally the future scares me?
So I'd say super excited, not because I'm burying my head in the sand, but just because I think this is the correct approach at this moment in time. There's definitely a lot of things to worry about. The thing is, most of them, I don't think we're in a position to really influence or even understand. At the same time, we're stuck in some sort of game where whatever we decide to do, there's other people on Earth that are going to decide to do other things. So we cannot just decide to become smarter more slowly, or just kind of forfeit technologies that we already developed, because the Chinese and others are going to keep running ahead. And even people here within the US, like, you just can't tell people to stop developing software or to stop training models. It's just not something that is practically possible. Should we try to develop institutions and approaches and everything else to figure out what to do about it? Definitely. And again, and the safety nets and all of that, I'm all for it. But it comes back to what we just discussed, the previous question. I don't think we should slow down AI. We should try to be as innovative as we can, and at the same time, think more seriously about how we're reinvesting the profits, how we're leveraging the technology, what kind of safety nets do we have. For me personally, it definitely introduces more uncertainty, but so my weakness is that anxiety that I described. It really drives everything I do. So I was worrying about these things long before everyone else started to, or most people did. So when you said, 5 years ago we thought we're going to have a stable career, I never thought that. I like, really, from my bones, not even I didn't even understand it. I'm not thinking that, but I always assumed that something terrible is about to happen and the world is going to turn upside down, and I designed my life to prepare for that. And I mean
have you got a bug out bag? Have you got a bag?
No, exactly. I was about to say, and I mean it more intellectually rather than, I don't have like a gun and like a bunker and everything else, but more just I assume that whatever I know is about to become irrelevant in a minute, and that I have to already think about something else, which is why my writing tends to jump from different places. And people are like, why are you already going there? I still want to read about this. But I'm like, yes, but I have to write about the other thing, because that's, I just feel like I have to, and I have to understand it. When I look at my kids, I'm terrified, but for other reasons, just because the world is changing so quickly, and I'm so scared of one day not understanding them and them becoming too weird for me to really get it. But I hope that I'll be able to stay a cool dad for at least 15 more years, until they're a little older, and then hopefully we survive puberty, and then after that, whatever they do is fine. But yeah, I mean, it's in a way, I'm one of those people that when things become really crazy, I kind of feel more comfortable, because I'm like, yes, that's what I prepared for. That's what I expected. So I feel like more at home. There's something comforting about it. But I think there's some people very different, but even someone like Trump, there's people that like to kind of cause chaos because that's where they're most comfortable. So I have to admit, I have a bit of that. So I don't try to cause chaos, but I think when I see things getting crazy, it excites me. And I feel like, okay, I'm more adapted to this environment than
It's
probably
like
the average corporate employee.
autopilot mode. You fly on. You actually you
Yeah.
mentioned again your writing. I thought, I guess I'd be remiss not to go back a few steps. I was lucky enough to be in the audience for your book launch in England, which feels like decades ago, but it was pre-COVID. And I was wondering, it's an amazing Rethinking Real Estate, it's an amazing book, and became like a sort of a Bible for anyone looking, trying to understand real estate with a modern perspective, and remove from the shackles of old school thinking about it. You got so much right in that book, and a large part was catalyzed by the COVID pandemic. Did you get anything wrong? Did anything not pan out as, and I know it wasn't per se a book around predictions, but ended up having what we're seeing today, a lot of things you alluded to there. Has anything not materialized, or have you been surprised how COVID or a post-COVID world hasn't met any of your thinkings around real estate?
Not really. I mean, not everything materialized yet, obviously, but I don't think anything happened that like contradicts some of the key themes in the book. If anything, I regret not being kind of more kind of hyperbolic and kind of clear about things. But
is that because the world, people weren't ready, or because actually it was too much of a stretch to even go there? That it would have been silly to think that we'd be in a point where offices might be 60% empty in the West End or something.
I think one, because I generally like to take people through my thinking process and then kind of let them apply it to whatever it is that they want to answer. So I seldom really tell people exactly what's going to happen unless I really feel it very strongly. Second, particularly because it's a book, then, the book is much more about, let me show you how I would approach these questions of, let's say, what's the future of real estate? So this is the history. These are the dynamics that played out so far. These are the kind of lines that I see now intersecting. So I'm going to describe these lines very, very clearly and understand what's driving them and what might kind of push them off their current course. And then I'll tell you where I think it's going, but that's about it. I don't have to say more than that. So I don't make necessarily very bold claims. I just say, okay, this is what I see. This is where it's headed as far as I'm concerned. And I think often that's enough, particularly when fewer people are even saying anything about it or seeing those lines at all. So I think just kind of letting people see those lines is enough. But yeah, I can be more hyperbolic and ridiculous, but it's probably going to be good for business. But
which of those lines just kept on going? I mean, an easy one to pick is sort of the work from anywhere, working not from the office, from home. Is that the one that stands out as you look at sort of pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, a behavioral shift that hasn't quite reverted back to a normal previously? I think we've seen returns to high streets and shopping centers, and
and I wrote that as well, by the way. I wrote, even when I wrote the book, retail was the end of the world, and I wrote, I think that ultimately, especially within cities, a street in a storefront in a main street, or even just in a non-main street, but in an urban area, it has inherent value. It's about figuring out what it is and what to do with it, and maybe the prices to adapt, but it's valuable. On the other hand, an office building, the 20th floor of some building, like 2,000 square meters of a box, it doesn't necessarily have inherent value. It might, it might just become completely valueless. And, particularly in historical perspective, again, the store at the street level, there was always something going on there that was valuable. But the 20th floor of some building that, there's nothing really exciting or inherently valuable about it. We can't assume that it will always remain valuable. To your actual question, what are the trends? So it's not so much trends like, okay, what's the percentage of people working from home and saying, oh, it's going up, so it will keep going up. It's more about really the fundamental forces that are driving this change. So one of the key things I noticed is that, the theory of why cities became so important and offices in cities became so important since the beginning of the internet in particular, was based on like three main pillars. And going even backwards, cities started to lose population from around the 1960s, a lot of kind of large Western cities, into like the 80s, even 90s in some cases. And when the internet came along, some people predicted that, that's going to intensify and people are going to work from home and work from anywhere. And then the cities will actually become less important as employment centers, more important as places of of leisure and culture and all of that. Most notably, Frances Cairncross, Dame Frances Cairncross now, who wrote for The Economist, and then she wrote a book called The End of Distance at 1997, and that's what she predicted. Actually, what's starting to happen now is what she predicted back then, 26 years ago. But in reality, after she wrote the book, that's not what happened. Actually, cities became more important, offices became larger, denser, more companies moved back into the city. And urban economists explained it in three main ways. Sorry, I'm going to give you a really long answer, but I think it's interesting. So there were kind of three theories that explained why this is happening. How come Ed Glazer, the kind of the economics dean at Harvard and probably the most prominent urban economist in the world, said that the central paradox of our time is the fact that while moving information and moving goods became cheaper and faster than ever, cities became more prosperous and more important. So you would think that the opposite would happen. And he wrote that in 2007, so 10 years after that death of distance theory. And economists explain that in three main ways. One is that as the economy becomes more dependent on information technology and knowledge work, then the importance of in-person interactions grows, because that's how you produce innovation, through what economists call collisions. People work together, they bump into each other, they bump into people from other industries, they kind of, the city kind of creates something that you can't create anything else. The second theory was more about lifestyle. That's like the Richard Florida rise of the creative class kind of theory. And they don't disagree with each other. It's just like a different kind of driver that says, as the economy becomes more dependent on technology and innovation, it becomes more dependent on white-collar, highly educated people. And these people like to live in cities because of the culture, because they like to live next to each other, because they like to eat ethnic food, for various lifestyle reasons. But because these people are becoming more important, then cities are becoming more important, because that's where these people like to live. So the offices are moving there because the talented people are there. And the third theory, most associated with Enrico Moretti, a UC Berkeley economist, originally from Italy, was that as work becomes more specialized, it becomes much more valuable to match people with very specific skills and experience to very specific work tasks. And that's something that you can only do if you hire within a large labor pool, which only exists in a large city. So you have to be in a very large region. Now, I looked at these three theories, and already from 2015 or so, I started to see that something in the theory doesn't add up, or more correctly, that the theories are correct, but their implications are very different from what their original authors thought they would be. And what I mean by that is that until 2015 or so, we thought that the matching theory and the collisions theory go hand in hand. They both point towards, okay, you have to be in a large city because that's where you get in-person interaction and that's where you get the largest labor market. But from 2015 or so, they started to be at odds, meaning companies suddenly realized that they can actually have employees in different markets working together on the same things, which meant that they could now, instead of hiring just from New York City or from London, they can have an R&D center in New York City and in London and in San Francisco and in Singapore, in a few different places, which means that now there's a trade-off. They have to decide, okay, do I want to split the work into multiple locations and then hire from a pool of 100 million people instead of hiring from a pool of 10 million people? Or do I want to keep everyone together and just work in person? So suddenly there was
that catalyst around technology. That shift was because you could work more effectively with different markets.
It's not, nobody came out and said exactly why it happened, but it's very clear that around 2015, something happened and these companies started splitting their headquarters, most notably Amazon, but all the others as well. So Apple, Facebook, Spotify, Google, Stripe. And and again, companies always had branches all over the world, so it was very easy to miss this thing. Like, it's not like a big deal that companies have an office in other big cities. The big deal was that they opened this office not in order to sell to the local market or to reach local customers. They opened this office in order to hire from there and then sell stuff to whoever and wherever they were selling
And
to.
is that higher on talent and on cost? Did it go both ways? So we'll go where the talent is, and we'll
It
also
was
go where
much
we
more
can
on
have
talent.
reduced.
It was much more on talent. Of course, they're related as well because you want to afford to hire the best possible people for the lowest possible price. But they're not necessarily opening offices in India. You know, if you have an office in San Francisco and you open one in New York and in London, you're not really cutting costs so much. And I saw that happening, and I even heard what some of them were saying. So when Stripe in 2019, before COVID, they opened their fourth hub, and they said our next hub is remote. It doesn't exist anywhere. And their CTO said, we open it because we want to reach the 99.74% of employees that don't live in Singapore and in Dublin and San Francisco and New York. And I was like, that didn't they hear the theory that they all have to be in person? And what does it mean? If you can split your headquarter into 5, why can't you split it into 10 or 20 or 50? And that's a question that I asked in the book. So, and it's also an example of how I approach things. I didn't say, okay, this is what's going to happen, but I just said there's a clear question here, and I don't have an answer as to why this is not going to happen. I don't see a limiting principle that will say, okay, Stripe can only split itself into 5 and not to 50. Because if people are collaborating remotely, it doesn't really matter anymore exactly where they are. And that's what ended up happening. And I think the process that's driving it is only intensifying. Work becomes even more specialized. Hiring from a larger pool becomes even more important. So it will expand that kind of radius from which companies are willing to hire further. At the same time, I do think that in some fields, the in-person interaction will remain very important and maybe even will become more important than ever. But I think overall, that kind of matching effect is going to overwhelm almost everything else and drive people to hire from anywhere more and more.
So it definitely feels that companies who are more modern companies, tech-oriented businesses have that mindset, and legacy institutions somewhat struggle with that. And you would have heard and written about a lot of the financial players saying, oh, back to the office, and that hasn't really manifested. Do we appreciate the middle and long-term effect of the slow and continual decline of the office worker, for example? When one looks at a city as a microcosm of activity, and what it means when you pay for the subway, you pay your ticket, and when you go to the office, you buy your sandwich, and you buy your drink, and you buy your coffee, and you go to the room and use your utilities, and you're paying your rent, and you go to the restaurant and a waiter serves. Like, how impactful is and I know about about percentage of people going to work. But let's just say, because conceptually, if the amount of activity within these urban spaces decreases, is there a measure by which we know what the knock-on effect is to that city? And does it hit a point of no return? Then do people start moving out? Others start moving in? Damn it! The broken window theory. We start getting a bit of decay. Yeah. Do we get that? And are we on that path in any major city that you make? San Francisco might be an example, but is there? Do you see from where you sit? Is the writing on the wall for you where cities are going to go up and some of it just will hit a point where they can't return to their glory days?
I mean, generally, I'm optimistic about the role of cities over the next 50, 100 years. But that doesn't mean that it will happen automatically. Cities will have to adapt, and the adapting, even in the best case, will be painful and take time. And time might mean a decade or two. Definitely, once the office is no longer the focal point, it will hurt city finances, it will hurt local businesses, which is tragic. Finally they figured out what to do with all of this retail. They turned a lot of it into food and entertainment, and suddenly all the people that were supposed to be a captive audience are really not showing up anymore. I'm optimistic though, because kind of tourism and other activities in some cities at least picked up the slack pretty quickly. I think I just read about New York City that receipts from kind of taxable dining and entertainment actually exceeded pre-COVID. for the first time. So not just that it came back, but it kind of like, I think even significantly higher now because people are doing more everywhere else other than in the office, it seems like. So that's good news. But at the same time, you have the property taxes side of it. So not the business tax where, offices are, real estate in general is a huge part of urban budgets. I think in New York, property taxes are about 40 or even 45% of the city's budget. And most of that is probably residential, but still offices are a big chunk of it. And as their valuations plummet and vacancy plummets, that's going to be felt. But I don't think it's the end of the world for cities. It's just another adjustment. And even over the last 100 years, they probably had 4 waves at least that kind of required similar adjustments. So my main fear is, again, about us as a society and our government, whether we still have that spirit of adapting and of being open-minded and of, going with the flow of technology rather than kind of trying to force people back into the old way of things or trying to pretend that nothing has happened. Because when I look at a lot of our cities, our country governments as well, they're still spending like there's no tomorrow and still kind of just doubling down on whatever they've been doing for the last few decades. And probably they have to spend on completely different things and do completely different things in order to have a better outcome for everyone.
So I suspect you get lots of proverbial knocks on your doors or emails saying, "Hey, what do I do?" Either I'm a fund that owns these skyscrapers, or conversely, I'm just an individual who owns this small office building on the outskirts where actually I haven't got the economies of scale to actually build out large, exciting office spaces, and they're very small floor plates and they're not sexy. In those scenarios, the big fund with large exposure to, let's say, traditional office blocks in large cities or even tertiary, secondary cities, and the small family that have saved in years and bought a few offices around the country, who haven't got the means or the experience to turn it into the sort of space we've been discussing around being experience first, what do we say to them? Is it sell up? Is it try and do something creative? Is there a lot of options realistically?
So one, as you may know, I don't like to get too practical. That's where I become humble. I think I help people figure out what's coming, more like a weather forecast. I'm reasonably good at that. I don't tell them exactly what they which window to close and where to dig, because I think other people are better at it, and because I think, particularly in real estate, every deal is a different story, and there's still office buildings that are good to buy now or good to hold now. There's some that are good to sell. It really depends on so many things. So I'm kind of cautious about that. But I think here too, like the story of careers that we began with, I think there's room both for some giant companies that will do more than any real estate company has ever done, add all sorts of services, build a network, be like the Marriott of real estate. And at the same time, there's also room for small, specialized, niche, unique, interesting ideas and concepts. And I actually think we should have even more of the smaller ones just as a society and as an economy, because the new kind of formats and things that work will emerge there through people's experimentation. And you can see that already, cities like London, for example, have much more interesting architecture than New York, I would say, just because the sites are smaller and people can build all sorts of little things without taking huge risk and without having to get, they need permits as well, but it's harder, I think, to develop in New York than in London. While in London, the sites are so big that it's very, very hard to try anything new. And if you build something, you're going to do something that is very kind of conservative and build kind of the same thing that just like all the other buildings next to you. So I think we need to encourage that kind of granularity and experimentation. So yeah, if I was a small owner, what would I do? I think you can still make money either by partnering or by doing something unique. Like my office here is, first, it's an office, so I leave home.
My next question was going to be, is, without getting too personal, what is your situation? Do you?
Yeah, so I work at an office every day. It's kind of the next town over, so it's about 10 minutes from home.
Do you walk? Do you drive, bus, train?
I drive or take the train. And so it's 10 minutes from home in one direction. It's like 25 minutes from the center of Manhattan, let's say in another direction by train. Um, and this building is actually owned by a family. They're not Blackstone. They own probably 2, 3 other buildings as well. So I mean, they're not hungry, but it's I don't know, like a 5-story office building. And one of the kids a few years ago said, "Hey, let's take one of the floors and make it a little more flexible, and kind of build suites." And that's what they did. So I have a private office, but I didn't have to fit it out. I can do it like one month by month. There's like a common space with coffee and all of that. They even brought like a community manager to be in charge of all the customers instead of just the family kind of or brokers
So
dealing with them.
you call them customers, not tenants. There you go. That's the
Yes.
language.
And yeah, that's in the book as well. And yeah, so and I think it works for them. So it doesn't and I also think these changes and other changes that are happening in the world of technology and finance, they give a lot of advantages to the very large companies in many ways, but they also make smaller properties suddenly much more relevant for institutional investors, because these investors, they're terrified of everything that's going on everywhere else, and they're pushing into smaller and smaller assets and into stranger and stranger types of kind of operating models. So suddenly, even a building like this, you can get a pension fund to buy it from you or to partner on it with you, whether them directly or someone on their behalf. But that's something that 10 years ago, for example, they wouldn't even look at. They would say, "Oh, this is too small," or "It's like the wrong part of the city. It's just not interesting to us." And now it is becoming an institutional kind of class building, which means, again, that even if you're a small operator, as long as you know what you're doing, suddenly you can get cheap money and kind of stable relationships, an opportunity to even scale yourself much further than you ever imagined. So yeah, so I don't look at what's happening now just as like a disaster for small landlords necessarily, or for even all offices. Yeah.
You have to think. And is there a limit you think people will go to in terms of the distance? You mentioned 10 minutes, if you had the same experience, but it was, because I speak to some colleagues who used to travel daily to work 2 hours each way, 2 hours there, 2 hours back. Do you think all we're seeing is actually there's a desire and a preference to be with people, be in a different space, not to be at home, to be able to go and grab a coffee and a sandwich, as long as it doesn't eat too much into my time?
Yes, I think so. Also, I know a lot of people, you should ask yourself, why are they even going to the office and why are they commuting? Some people just, they don't want to be at home. They want to be away from their home for as long as possible and arrive as late as possible. So, so the mission is accomplished as far as they're concerned, even if they're commuting. But I think in general, yeah, I think most people will not be interested in working at home from home, but they will not necessarily be interested in commuting too far for things that they could do from home. So, and also I think for companies in general, I mentioned previously the kind of Stripe example of the remote hub. I think a lot of the future is exactly about that. It is offices, it is even corporate offices, but they're more distributed than they were previously, which is still a big change, but it's very different from saying everyone is just going to work from home. I don't think that's what's going to happen. So yeah, but I think here my hunch is that a lot of knowledge workers kind of have the same preferences as I do, of like, I want to work at an office, but I don't want to go too far, and I don't want to be told what to do. Of course, I'm not the best example because I work for myself and my work is quite unique. But at the same time, I think that a lot of knowledge workers have the same kind of inclinations as I do. People that do a lot of focused work, and just that generally value their time. I think they don't want to commute for an hour and a half every day.
No. And I'm wondering, obviously, we reflect on Adam Newman's theories and philosophizing over the office space, and suddenly some of these seem quite pertinent, going to space that is very design-led, that encourages those interactions, that has the social element built into it. But of course, that hasn't played out, and their share price is also quite questionable. I'm aware of the time. I know we're going to go, so we'll very quickly end.
Yeah, we can go a little longer.
I know you got a 10-minute commute home. Uh, your,
Oh,
your
just the middle of the day.
of course, it's late here. I forget. Um, your latest series that you're running is on AI. So I have two questions around that. One is around the content, but the second piece is, without giving away your secret sauce about anything, how do you, a man with a family and a commute, and I'm assuming interest outside of
A
work,
mortgage.
how and a mortgage, how do you manage everything? So I find I often struggle with the fact that there's not enough time in the day. I want to prioritize the kids and the family, but like there's not enough time to consume, and the amount I want to consume is only getting more and more and more, and also I want to create. So, do you have any practical hints and tips or any insight? How do you manage to do this amazing content, which I am objectively and unequivocally a massive fan of, which must take time because it does. You run courses. It's the infrastructure. It's setting up those schemes of work. It's writing books. How much has tech enabled you to do that, or actually even prior to this, you would always have this sort of output? Because I sit in awe of Dror.
So one, I barely manage. It's important to point that out. It's hard. I don't get to do everything that I planned. Uh, Nothing ever goes as quickly or as easily as I thought it would most of the time. And there's this constant kind of anxiety and uncertainty around it all. So let's take that. Yeah, let's acknowledge that. I think beyond that is, how do I manage? I read a lot. I spend a lot of time on Twitter, which I think is an incredible tool.
Audiobooks, or you read? So you
So,
actually
so everything. I consume content in every. If I could inject it into my veins, I would do that as well. So I listen to podcasts when I walk. I read a Kindle at night in bed. I read hardcover books. Uh, I'm on Twitter a lot, so I can't, like, I have to absorb information all the time. That's kind of like my vice in a way. I get bored very, very quickly, so I have to constantly feed stuff into my head. I take a lot of notes, which is mostly me emailing myself. So
that is that your app of choice? No Evernote, no OneNote, no Drive. It's just you have a list of, to me, emails that.
So I do a few things. I like to read on Kindle because I can highlight stuff and then it's all organized and searchable. Then I use a thing called Readwise, which actually goes through my highlights and keeps sending me reminders and kind of helps me kind of keep track on it, which I love. And beyond that, I don't have a clear system. I save some articles to Pocket. I email myself. It's not very organized, but it's not terribly disorganized either. It's just like I have a lot of notes, and I write. So I think when you write, you force yourself to think about stuff and to explain it. And now with ChatGPT, it's even easier. I just let it do everything. No, but for me, it's like the colleague I never had. So it's really good when I write because I kind of bounce ideas off of it. I let it read stuff and comment on it and critique it and argue with me.
Are you paying for four, by the way?
Yeah. I'm paying whatever they'll give me, I'll pay for it. I mean, it's so the leverage. I mean, it's everyone should pay for it. I mean, it's such an easy thing to the value. It's unbelievable. I mean, the power that you get. Like, I would pay whatever they want for it. Like, I'd pay $1,000. No, really, it's like, how could you not pay for it? And it's completely a complete tangent, but it made me think of Google, actually, because the last time that something emerged that you just start using it and you become immediately so dependent on it was I think, the search engine. And back then, the only way they could go was to show ads, because online payments were not advanced. You couldn't start charging people. But I thought, if they would have, they could have, the world would have become completely different. If they just asked people to pay instead of having an advertising-based web, we would have had something very different, and would have been interesting.
So you've acquired an assistant. So ChatGPT has enabled you to do more work a bit.
Yeah, but that's very recent. So I just read a lot. I try to write, 2-3 times a week, and I try to discipline myself in various ways on the one hand, and at the same time to be kind to myself that, like, if I feel like writing about something else, that I just go and write about that something else. I read an interesting thing. There's a director, Sidney Lumet, is like one of the greatest directors of the 20th century. And he said that with a lot of his superstars, if he wanted them to do something differently, he actually told them, "Oh, you did great. Okay, I have the takes. I have what we need. But now let's do it 5 more times. Like, now just do whatever you want." And he said that's how he got like the good stuff. He had to first like tell these people that they're kind of like okay.
Validation.
And then so I'm trying to treat myself in a similar way. I'm trying to like do some stuff that I consider kind of boring or I have to, and then kind of riff off and do other stuff that is kind of like irrelevant, but that the irrelevant stuff is usually what ends up being
if you wrote two things, one that you were impassioned about and was driven by just in the moment, and you put it out into the ether, and one that you just sort of threw a chat GTP to produce, and you put both out there, and the former didn't land, and the other one went viral. As a creator, what's more important to you, the external validation and the dopamine we all get with the likes, or actually the knowledge that you're putting out stuff that is meaningful and valuable, or does it not even cross your mind?
I mean, I enjoy both, I have to say. I think obviously, I mean, when you get attention and recognition, it's fun. I mean, you can't deny it. At the same time, I do think that most of the best stuff that I write is not necessarily always the stuff that resonates with people. Definitely not immediately. Sometimes they come back to it like a year or two later, or I bring it back and put it in context, and then people get it. But I definitely enjoy my I enjoy my writing. I like write something and then I'm kind of like happy about it or unhappy about it, but it's not always related to what people do with it. And also the process is very different. Sometimes it takes me 30 minutes to write something and it like does really, really well. And sometimes I work on something for a month and like nobody cares.
Really?
So yeah. And I would even say that the stuff, the first kind is even usually succeeds more. Because it tends to be kind of like more personal, more intuitive, more kind of just like making a single point rather than building a whole theory. And people seem to like that more, both because it's easier to understand and also just because it has more personality, and it just resonates.
Well, that's one thing that I really enjoy, is that you come across as human. You refer back to there was one really nice series where I think you linked it to your time as a soldier, like, and it's quite personal, but it helps build the character behind the person. That helps contextualize the words that they write. And you don't often get that. I think a lot of people don't like make themselves vulnerable in the world of Twitter and trolls, and people don't like to give too much away. But for me, it only enriches the content. And in a world we're going to get to where so much content can be automated, knowing that it's coming from a person with a backstory makes it that much more enjoyable. So that's just a note from me. I really enjoy those bits.
Yeah, I think I'm more human in writing than in person. It's hard to, it's harder for me. No, but it's true. I express myself like, I don't know how to, I mean, I know how to talk to people in the real world, but when they ask, I feel like my writing is the best way to get to know me and to understand what I do and who I am. When I meet people and I have to ask me, "Oh, what do you do?" I have no idea what to tell them. Like, I think
what is your profession, by the way? If someone says, "Hey, you're at a dinner party," and someone's passing you, "Hey, so what?"
Yeah, so sometimes I say I'm a writer.
What do you do? I'm a writer.
Yeah, I say I'm a writer, or I give advice, or it's like, it's not very clear. It's
Would you ever go
to
into education? Would you ever go into like more formal? I know you're doing the online courses, which
so
obviously the form.
I almost went, when I was studying at the LSE, I did my master's, and I was already kind of into the PhD program, kind of speaking. I had like an advisor, but then I decided not to do it because I just felt that spending the next 5-6 years researching something super narrow and only reporting back to this one academic that, as wonderful as they may be, are not the most exciting people in the world. I just felt that it's not for me, and that the constraints in academia are too much for me personally, and also too much, I think, to produce stuff that is really cutting edge in the topics that I'm interested in. I think for very narrow and specialized stuff, it's still very good, like analyzing something specific or scientific work. But work that is so much about synthesizing like mine, I think the constraints that academia puts on you in terms of like what you're allowed to look at, what you're not allowed to look at, which discipline you're into, what processes and methodologies you use, how much conjecture and intuition you're allowed to use. I just thought that it's not for me. And these days, I speak at different universities every now and then, but they don't pay so much. And if you want to like teach there, so one, there's the issue of which department do I even fall into, which is tricky.
Philosophy?
Second, yeah, maybe, but those aren't the ones, So people talk to me from economics, from real estate, from sociology even, but they don't really know how to absorb or digest me, exactly because by definition my work. Hello, guest.
I'll be 2 minutes on. This
So
is one of the
sweet.
benefits
Hello.
of working from home. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to finish up in 2 minutes. Okay. Say bye, Dror. Say bye, Dror. You're actually eating bamba.
Bye. That's the best.
I'll be 1 minute, darling. 1 minute.
I mean, she can hang out with us as well, and it's fine.
Okay, you're the boss. You're the boss. And this is one of the things I do love working from home. It's having the ability to be around the entire time, even around bath time, isn't that? Yeah, it's a bath time now. No, I don't think so. Right, this may have caused a natural end and pause into our talk, which is a shame because I could and would talk to you for hours, and I know your time is valuable, and I've learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone listening is going to be obviously inspired. And just thank you. As I said, I look back to our first interaction of 6 years ago, and so since then I've been an avid fan of your writing, and I really enjoy hearing a bit more of the context to it all today. So thank you. Oh, I hope you have a lovely afternoon, a wonderful rest of the week, and I'll speak to you soon. I'm going to stop the recording now. 1 second.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you for listening to Pixel Chasing, and well done for making it right to the end. If you enjoyed today's episode, feel free to share with others who you think may also enjoy it. And to be kept up to date with all they're up to here, you can always follow us on the usual channels. On Twitter, we are @PixelChasing. On Instagram, we are @PixelChasing. And if you want to join our newsletter to be kept up to date with all future episodes, you can join that on our website, which is pixelchasing.com. Thank you.